Why don't you join me? Let's pray, and we're going to jump in and talk about, well, we're going to finish off our series. Let's pray. My name's Tim, by the way. I can't even know if I said that. Hi. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you that it offers life and hope and meaning and purpose. We thank you for the way that we've been able to study your word and the way it is a light to our path and the way it's brought clarity and guidance over the course of this series. And I pray that today, as we wrap things up, that you really would help us to get a real sense of what you want us to be on about and what you expect from us as your people. And we pray that in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, as kind of we picked up, today we're finishing our series in work-life balance, and one of the most common bits of feedback we've received over the course of this series in particular, honestly probably more than any other series, is just how relevant it has been for the day-to-day life. And so a bunch of people have actually come share with me or with others and told us practical things that they've implemented in their life as a result of the series. And so, for example, one person let me know that his wife is now actually much nicer to him after we learnt about the principles of fruitfulness and faithfulness. Someone else told me about the immediate benefits that they had received in their life now that they're trying to sleep more than 5.5 hours a night, or 4.5 hours, correction, it was. Crazy person. Someone else thanked me for justifying their love of online gaming, and so, you're welcome. But look, I know I'm slightly biased, but I think it's been a great series. And so if you haven't joined us for the series, it's all available online, on the website, on the podcast, and so I'd encourage you to go and have a listen. We've talked about things like how to find meaning and purpose in your work, how to balance your responsibilities at home, at church and work, the importance of taking time out to rest and the importance of getting good sleep. Even talked about the proper place of leisure in a life serving God. And so it's been a great series, I think. One of the reasons I think we've loved it so much is, in many ways, it's scratched where we're itching. That is, I suspect a bunch of us feel maybe a little bit lost at work. We feel torn in just so many different directions and we're not quite sure how to do it all. We feel like we live in a fog of fatigue. And so I think one of the benefits of this series is just being how practical and earthy it is. Having said all of that, one thing that we haven't really done, we've maybe kind of skirted around the edges of it. One of the things we haven't done is go up a few stories and ask the bigger questions. Bigger questions like, okay, before we try to balance it, what's our life supposed to be about? What kind of work does God actually want me to do? And furthermore, how does the fact that Jesus could return at any moment shape and influence some of the things that we've been talking about? Right, we haven't asked those questions, and so that's largely what I want to do today. To use an analogy, I feel like we've spent the last 6 weeks giving you really practical tips on how to sail the boat that is your life, right? If your life is a boat, we've talked about how to sail it. Pull the rigging, that's the boom. I'm going to get all that stuff wrong, but you get the point. But we haven't yet said, okay, here's actually where you want to sail it to. I haven't said, okay, here's a compass, here's true north, follow the star. Again, that's what I want to try and do today. In terms of how we're going to do it, there will be 3 points, but the bulk of what I want to do is spend a bunch of time in the parable of the talents and help us to consider what does that mean for our lives. So that's, if you like, point 1, and then the second 2 points will really just be 2 additional, if you like, principles to consider as you reflect on how the parable of the talents relates to you. Make sense? Excellent. Let's jump in. It's in Matthew 25, but a bunch of the verses will come up. Point 1, great talents bring great responsibility. Great talents bring great responsibility. If you were here last week, you might remember that Sam Chan preached for us at all 3 services. At the end of the 6 p.m. service, Sam kind of came over to me. I was sitting down here. He came over and said, I'm just really impressed with this guy. And he was pointing to Charles Cleworth, who was playing music and leading us in the music at the 6 p.m. service. He went on to say, when God was handing out the talents, I reckon he got to Charles and tripped. He was saying, Charles is just a very talented musician. The English word talent comes from a parable that Jesus tells in Matthew 25. We had it read out for us before. The thing is, talents, what we think of talents is actually a different thing to what talents means in the story. The English word comes from the application of the parable, but the word itself in the story means something different. You see, the story, the parable, a parable is just a simple story with a deeper meaning. Jesus told lots of them. The parable is primarily about how Jesus' followers are to wait for him while they wait for his return. And so it begins, we won't read the whole thing, but it begins in Matthew 25, 14 to 15. Jesus writes, "For it will be like a man going on a journey, who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away." Now that word talents in the Greek is the word talenton. Again, in the original, his hearers didn't think, oh, that's a natural ability. They heard something else, because the word talenton in the original first century was a reference to a weight. It was a measurement of weight, a weight of, what's the word I'm looking? A measurement, way of measuring the weight of something. You get it. And in particular, it was most often used with reference to money. And so, for example, a talent of silver, right, denarii, was roughly equivalent, and if you've got an NIV translation, it'll be in the footnote, roughly equivalent to 20 years of a day labourer's wages. Now, you transfer that across to today, that's about $1 million. Right? So 1 talent is $1 million, quite a lot of money. Now, that's if it's silver. It doesn't actually say whether it's silver or gold. The NIV translation calls this parable the parable of the bags of gold. And so they've gone with gold, which means it's at least $1 million, possibly much more. So we're talking about a large amount of money. What's interesting, though, is what verse 15 says. Right? So to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his own ability. In other words, the master looks at his servants and goes, which of you guys are going to steward and invest my resources in a way that's going to maximize returns? Okay, you can take 5, you take 2, you take 1. And then he goes away. Now, while he goes away, we won't read it now, we had it read out for us before, the first 2 get to work. And so the guy that got 5 works hard, he invests, he turns it into 10. The guy who got 2 works hard, he invests, he turns it into 4. The guy who was given 1 just actually buries it in the ground and then kicks back and just takes it easy. Time goes by, the master returns. When the master returns, he comes and settles the accounts for all 3 servants. And so let's take a look at what happens with the first. Matthew 25, 20 to 21. "And he who'd received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, 'Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here, I've made 5 talents more.' His master said to him, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master.'" Now, 2 things I want you to notice from what the master says. The first thing to notice is that he says, you've been faithful over a little. Now, first thing, remember, he's saying this to the guy who he gave 5 talents to. We've already said that 5 talents of silver is $5 million, and that's if it's gold, it's even more than that. And yet he says, yeah, you've been faithful over a little. What does that tell you? It tells you the master's loaded, doesn't it? He thinks, oh yeah, you know, 5 million, you turned it into 10. Okay, here's a real job. Just as an aside, that real job is given in the new creation, right? This is how to wait for Jesus while he returns. Just think through the imagery that paints for you of what the new creation, right, heaven is going to be like. Sometimes the Bible uses the picture of a gathering of God's people, right? Revelation 7, gathering of God's people, gathered round the throne, singing his praises. I long for that day, particularly in light of the fact that we can't sing at the moment. But that's just one image. Another image you get at Hebrews 4. We talked about this a couple of weeks back. This picture of rest where we get to enjoy fellowship with God. But here's a different image. It's a picture of work, of stewarding and investing the master's assets in a way that brings development and progress. Right, the new creation isn't necessarily just going to be static and flat and remain the same way the whole time, where we just sit around on harp and play harps on clouds. It's a place of joyful and productive work in service to the master. All right, that's the first thing. Faithful over a little. Second thing to draw your attention to is the fact that the master says, enter into the joy of your master. Now, that's crazy because our translations throughout use the language of servant. It's not a servant, it's a slave. No master says that to his slave. When the master gets home, he says, fix me dinner. I'll eat first and you can eat after I'm sorted. Right? The slave serves the master and the master's joy is preeminent. But in the parable, the master says to the slave, come in and share in the joy of your master. In other words, what's mine is yours and we can enjoy it together. And therefore, not only is this master loaded, he's also an incredibly good master to serve. And so his slaves share in his joy. So there's, if you like, slave number one, the guy that gets 5. The guy that gets 2 and turns it into 4, we won't read it. Basically, the exact same thing happens. The master says, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. Here's a bit more. Enter into the joy of your master. What about the third servant? Third servant, remember, was the guy who gets 1 talent, buries it, puts it in a plot of land and just waits. Now, we won't read the whole thing, but basically when the master comes and calls him to account, he justifies his lack of diligence by blaming the master's character. He says, you're a man of business and you're a bit shady and you never do any of the work, you get everyone else to do it for you. But the master sees through the slave's excuse and take a look at what he says. You wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I scatter no seed. Right? I'm a man of business. People do this stuff for me. Then if you knew that, then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers. And at my coming, I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talents from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. Right? Wicked and slothful aren't words you ever want to hear from the master. Particularly not when the master is as good as and has been as generous as this master has to his slaves. So, there's the parable. What's it mean? Well, let me give you 3 points of application, just still under this first point, the parable of the talents. Application point number 1 is it's not about fulfilling your potential. The parable of the talents is not about fulfilling your potential. At least not in the way that we often think of that phrase. You see, this parable is actually one of a series of parables that come in Matthew 24 and 25, each of which give us a slightly different element or aspect on how Jesus' followers are supposed to wait for him before he returns. And so if you go Matthew 24, we're supposed to wait like homeowners, who know that a thief might break in and steal, and so we're alert and vigilant. He might come at any moment. Start of Matthew 25, we're supposed to wait like virgins, or probably our language might be bridesmaids, waiting for the groom. In that culture, it wasn't like, the wedding starts at 1. It's kind of like, well, he'll turn up at some point. And so you kind of wait knowing that it might take a little longer than expected, and so you need to be prepared. Our parable says that we're supposed to wait like slaves charged with the responsibility of increasing their master's assets. We're supposed to wait like slaves charged with the responsibility of increasing their master's assets. Now again, I know our translation says servants, but it's slaves. Here's the thing about slaves. Slaves don't get to decide what they want to do. And furthermore, nothing a slave has actually belongs to them. It's all to the master. And therefore, the master hasn't entrusted you with a bunch of talents so that you can achieve your potential, so that you can achieve self-actualization. He's given you his talents so that you can use them to increase his assets before Jesus returns. Or if I can return to my illustration of the boat from before, he hasn't given you this boat that we call life so that you can just have a little bit of a joyride having fun on the harbour. Now, there's nothing wrong with leisure. Go back and listen a couple of weeks back. But he's given it to you for a purpose. He wants you to go somewhere. He wants you to use this boat called life to increase the master's assets. Number 1, it's not about fulfilling your potential. Application number 2, how much we're entrusted with varies quite a lot. How much we're entrusted with varies quite a lot from person to person. See, I mentioned before that the original word talenton originally was a unit of weight. But in the application of the parable, it becomes pretty close to how we often think of a talent, natural ability. But it's more than that. That's why today when we use the word talent, we don't think unit of weight, we think a natural ability. The parable has actually shaped the English language. And so a talent in this story kind of represents really anything that is given to you by God. Could be gifts of intellect, oratory, strength, education, influence, opportunity that comes from living in a certain place at a certain time, the ability to persevere when things get hard, courage to face persecution, right? That and all the more. As I was reading this week, someone described, your talents are really your personality, your position, and your possessions. Your personality, your position, and your possessions. I think that's a really helpful way to think about what talents are. The thing is, we don't all get the same amount. We don't all get the same amount. Some get 5, some get 2, some get 1. No, even 1's still $1 million, so it's nothing to sneeze at, but we don't all get the same amount. Now, on the one hand, you might be tempted, there might be a little thing in your heart, my heart has it too, where you hear that and you start to get a little bit resentful. Oh, I only got 2. I only got 1. And you start to get jealous looking at other people. But I don't think we're supposed to lead to jealousy. I think this recognition actually ought to be liberating. Why? Well, think of the Apostle Paul just for a moment. I reckon the Apostle Paul was a 5-talent slave, maybe a 10-talent slave for that guy. Now, that's not to suggest that he didn't work hard. The guy was a machine. He worked hard. But at the end of the day, there's a bunch of stuff that's different about him and me, such that my life is going to look different to his. Right? If God tripped over Charles, he crashed into Paul when he was handing out the talents. I think that's liberating. For me, I don't have the gift, the opportunity, the education, the freedoms, the assignment that Paul had. And therefore, as much as I might admire the life that he lived, his life and my life are going to look very different. You know what? That's okay. Why? Well, one of the coolest things about this parable is that the master says the exact same thing to the guy that ends with 10 talents as he does to the guy who ends with 4. In other words, the master doesn't assess your work on the basis of what he gave someone else, but on the basis of what he gave you. And so your responsibility is not to freak out about what you don't have, but to be faithful with what you do have and use it to seek to increase the master's assets while you wait for Jesus. Number 3, the master expects a return on his investment. The master expects a return on his investment. I think the main point of the lazy slave in this parable is to strike a bit of healthy fear into the life of Jesus' followers. See, if you read it in the context of the other parables and the whole of Matthew, the book of Matthew, everything else that Jesus says, you can't treat it as teaching some kind of works-based righteousness. The lazy slave gets thrown out where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. It's not saying if you work hard enough, God will say, well done, good and faithful. It's not really the point. In the context, it's supposed to be force us to consider what we're doing with the talents that God has given us. It's the Peter Parker principle, right? Spider-Man. Uncle Ben says to Peter Parker, Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. Just stole it from Jesus. Great talents bring great responsibility. I'm looking out at a bunch of people that God tripped over when he was handing out the talents. What are you doing with it? Are you using those talents to increase the master's assets or your own? Now, suppose you ask, which I suspect you've been asking for a while, what exactly does it mean to increase the master's assets? Well, the truth is the parable doesn't actually tell us what that means. It tells us that God expects us to do it, but not exactly what it means. Now, I think a narrow application would probably, or a narrower interpretation, would probably limit it to the work of making and maturing disciples. Right? So the work of evangelism, church planting, mission, that kind of thing. But it does come in a series or a string of parables each outlining a different aspect of how God's people are supposed to wait for Jesus before he returns. And therefore, in light of the broader context, I think it's safe to say that it also refers to the work of doing good, of serving others, of growing in godliness, and just generally living for Jesus rather than yourself. So, well done, good and faithful servant. Are those words you want to hear one day? If they are, trust in Christ, repent of sin, and then get to work seeking to maximize the master's assets using the power, or the, personality, possessions, and position that he's given you. In fact, maybe this week, right, work-life balance, we're kind of finishing the series, maybe this week is a week that you actually want to spend a little bit of time thinking to yourself, okay, can I do that? How have I been going so far? Do I have capacity to maybe do that a little bit more? Maybe spend a bit of time this week thinking about how you can do that. As you do, I want to offer now, so if that's point one, there's point two, point three. These two are really just going to be principles that I want you to take on board and consider as you reflect on how can I increase the master's assets, okay? Principle number one. Some work is better than others. Better than other work, I know. Some work is better than others. Now, you should know I've just committed a massive Christian faux pas when I say some work is better than others. Because one of the big emphases in the Christian literature on work in recent years has been to emphasize the dignity and value of all honest work. And so if you pick up any Christian book written in the last probably 20 years on the topic of work, they will all, without fail, stress the fact that you can please God just as much as a mechanic, as a farmer, as a doctor or a lawyer, just as much as you can please him as a pastor. In other words, they're all trying to correct a false distinction that for many years was drawn between the so-called secular work and sacred work. Now, as long as your work is done by faith and in service of King Jesus, it's pleasing to God. Now, just so we're clear, I agree with that. I think that correction was much needed. Too many people who go in secular work feel like second-class citizens for doing so. It shouldn't be the case. You can please God anywhere. But as important as the emphasis is, it's not quite the whole truth. There's more to be said. So for example, take a look at what Daniel Doriani writes. He writes, "The saying, all work is equal, is true from one perspective, but empty rhetoric from another. All work is equal in that a stock clerk and an executive can please God equally, and every honest job has equal dignity. But an executive shapes a company and even society in a way that a stock clerk never will, and it's ludicrous to pretend otherwise. As a former pastor and a former stock boy, I'm sure I did more good with a strong sermon for 1,000 people than I did when I put olives in the most convenient spot for a low-ranking cook." One of the reasons I love that quote is because of how refreshing it is. I've read a bunch of books for this series, probably at least 8 or so on work. He's the only guy who speaks like that. Has actually got the courage to say, you know what? All work, you can honour God wherever, but some work's better than others. And he draws attention to the work of leadership. You know, he talked about an executive can shape a society, and the work of preaching. He used pastor, but we'll call it work of the Lord. You see, when I say that some work is better than others, let me just be clear. I'm not making a moral statement. I'm making a strategic statement, by which I mean you can please God if you do honest work wherever you do it, but actually some work does more good than others. So I want to explore that little distinction with you, using the two examples he's given. First of all, leadership, and then the second, if you like, ministry or the work of the Lord. We'll come to that. Leadership. Now, for the sake of time, I'm not going to work through a Bible passage, but if you want to write one down, Isaiah 32, 1-5, great place to go to see the way that a leader can create an environment in a city where the people flourish. particularly with the work. Now, in that context, I think it's primarily talking about the work of the Messiah, but then his kind of princes under him create an environment in a city where the people flourish. They find shelter. The thing is, you see that principle all through the Bible. You see it in the kings of Israel. So when they had a good king, the people flourish. When they had a bad king, the people flounder. In other words, from a strategic point of view, leaders can bring about more good, or more bad for that matter, than the average person can. Now, if that is true, how might that shape the way you think about your talents and increasing the master's assets while you wait for Jesus' return? Well, here's one perspective. Again, Daniel Doriani. Trailblazers and organisational leaders ought to steward their rare gifts. Nations need the best possible governors, and corporations need the most talented and virtuous executives. Therefore, it is sensible for people with high energy and gifts to strive for leadership. If 10 physicians can perform routine surgeries well, but only one can improve surgical procedures, then the one should probably see surgical innovation as his calling. The typical surgeon heals one patient at a time, but the innovator has the ability to serve hundreds. So then, if opportunity for wider service never comes, we serve cheerfully in our place. But if we're qualified for a strategic task and it finds us, we'll come back to that, we should be open to it. If possible, we should ignore questions of salary and status, since strategic tasks may not offer tangible rewards. Again, I love that quote for a few reasons. First, it talks about the importance of stewarding gifts. Right? If God has given you 5 talent gifts, chances are he expects 5 talent returns. But the second reason I love it is because he has a biblical understanding of calling. You might remember week 2, we talked about what calling is. So I'll show you this. He talks about the importance not only of stewarding your leadership gift, if you like, but also of the equally necessary ingredient of having the opportunity to do so. Too many people say, oh, I'm gifted in this, therefore I must do it. No. Take a look at what he says. So, with regards to calling, if opportunity for wider service never comes, we serve cheerfully in our place. It's not your calling, even if you have the gift. But if we are qualified for a strategic task and it finds us, we should be open to it. I love that as well. You should be open to it. It doesn't say you must. You should be open to it. I love that. See, this is where we need to put all this in the context of what we talked about a couple of weeks back with regards to, faithfulness and fruitfulness. You remember that? And so, one example. You may have incredible leadership gifts, but for the moment, your primary assignment might be motherhood. And so you may only really be leading your kids. Not only, but you know what I mean. Now, that's not being idle with your leadership gift. It's simply being faithful to the calling of motherhood. There may well come a time where God opens up an opportunity to lead tens, to lead hundreds, to lead thousands. And maybe at that time, it's your call to move forward and use that leadership gift to lead. But for now, it may just be that God is calling you to lead your family, lead your kids. As I said, it's one example. All that to say, if you have the gifts of leadership and the opportunity to do it, you probably should. Why? Not because leadership is morally better than anything, but because it's strategically better. Leaders, generally speaking, have more opportunity to do more good for people. It's a great way to steward your gifts as we wait for the Master's return. So I want to do 2 examples under this. First is leadership. The second is what we're going to call the work of the Lord. And I get this phrase from 1 Corinthians 15:58. This is Paul at the very end of the letter to Corinthians. He's just talked about the resurrection of Jesus and the certainty that one day those who trust in Christ will rise. And he so finishes, "Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain." That word, the phrase, the work of the Lord, refers to making and maturing disciples. It refers to evangelism and edification, mission and ministry, however you want to spin that. That's what it's talking about. Furthermore, the reason it's not in vain is because those who hear the gospel message and trust in Christ will be raised to new life, never to die again in the resurrection at the last day. Okay, so why is this such a strategic and important work? Well, hopefully it's obvious. You can please God by making sandwiches and by making disciples, but only one of them are going to last forever. Now, it's not to say that our world doesn't need sandwich makers, or that there's anything wrong with making sandwiches. It's simply to say that if you're a Christian sandwich maker, you can't afford to forget the priority of making disciples. And so, Peter Orr, actually a lecturer of mine from Bible College, writes this: unquestionably, the road sweeper and the pastor stand equal before God. And as the road sweeper does his work, he's serving the Lord and will be rewarded. Whatever their employment, Christians can and must glorify the Lord through their work. Nevertheless, it is also true that the work of evangelism and edification is the work that the Lord is doing in the world through his people. We must not lose this priority. The resurrection means that it is this work that every Christian can and must give themselves to. That's why we asked Sam Chan to come and speak last week. You might have been thinking, well, what's the place of evangelism in work-life balance? Everything. Particularly given in the 21st century, so many of us, and I put myself in this basket, find it we're so consumed with work and we've only got enough time to just kind of look after our family that, the work of ministry and mission just sort of drops off. So easy to get consumed in these other things. But when Paul told the Corinthians, abound in the work of the Lord, he wasn't saying quit your job and go and become pastors. No, he's just saying make sure the work of the Lord remains a key priority in your life, no matter what you do. So therefore, as you spend a little bit of time this week thinking through, okay, what are the talents that God has given me? How am I using them to increase the master's assets before he returns? Maybe you want to think, is there some capacity that I have to increase fruitfulness either in leadership, in the work of the Lord, as you wait for the master's return? This is the first principle, so that's point 2, if you like. Now we're up to the second principle, point 3, and then we'll wrap up. Principle number 2, good work is often hard work. Good work is often hard work. Often. In week 1 of the series, kind of coincidentally, Grace City was hosting a bit of a boot camp for a bunch of pastors to come and do professional development. Now, none of us were sharing or participating. We just hosted the conference here. But one of the guys who was key in presenting was also my coach in ministry for the first couple of years of church, still a bit of a mentor to me. Anyway, they ran the thing down here, and then he kind of came upstairs to my office and said, he saw this. He goes, Tim, work-life balance? What are you doing? What are you going to tell him? Don't live a balanced life? Balance is pagan. Imagine hearing that from your mentor. One of the problems of this title is that balance can mean a bunch of different things to different people. When balance is used to describe the struggle of being faithful in each of the assignments that God has given you, I think it's a great word. When balance is used to describe the importance of rest and the legitimate place of enjoying God's gifts, I think it's a good word to use. But when balance is used to imply, sort of even just subtly, that the goal of life is to kind of take it easy and minimize stress, I think it's maybe just a little bit pagan. Take the Apostle Paul as an example. It's hard to describe the Apostle Paul as living a balanced life, isn't it? At least in that third sense of the word. For example, take a look at 2 Corinthians 11, 23 to 28. He writes, I've worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. How do you get shipwrecked 3 times? That's bad luck, isn't it? I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I've been constantly on the move. I've laboured and toiled and often gone without sleep. I've known hunger and thirst and often gone without food. I've been cold and naked, and besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. Did Paul live a balanced life? Well, yes, if by balanced we're talking about his faithfulness to each of the assignments that God gave him. And yes, if we're referring to the fact that my sense is, though it's not explicitly taught, my sense that he probably did regularly practice times of rest. He's a good Jew, he's trained in the Sabbath, and he understands it's fulfilled in Christ, but he still understood the importance of rest. But he wasn't balanced in the sense that he lived an easy life. Now again, he was a 5, maybe 10 talent slave, and so I'm not saying that you have to look exactly like him. But if you think the whole point of this series has been just kick back and take it easy, you've missed the point. You probably don't remember it, but in week 1 of the series, I told you my goal for the series. I said the goal for the series is not to encourage you to cut back, Marie Kondo your life and spend more time at the beach with your family. Might be an application, but it's not the goal. The goal of the series has been to encourage and equip you to live a life in which you pour yourself out in the service of others for the glory of God in a life-giving and sustainable way. Good work is often hard work. Kevin DeYoung is an American pastor, author of several books, one of which is Crazy Busy. It's a very helpful book, basically outlines a bunch of kind of reasons why Christians might find themselves crazy busy, and so he's trying to prevent us from that. But at the end of the book, he writes this: I don't want you to think that the best thing we can do for ourselves and for the world is take a pass on every difficult request, live for leisure, and throw ourselves a giant me party. I don't want you to think that hard work is the problem, or that sacrificing for others is the problem, or that suffering is necessarily the problem. If you have creativity, ambition, and love, you will be busy. We're supposed to disciple the nations. We're supposed to work with our hands. We're supposed to love God with our minds. We're supposed to have babies and take care of them. It's not a sin to be busy. I've felt a similar tension throughout this series. It's not a sin to live an imbalanced life. Yeah, you have to be faithful to the assignments God's given you. Yes, it's important to practice the discipline of rest and rely on God, but that doesn't mean it's always going to be easy. Good work is often hard work. There's a Sri Lankan pastor named Ajith Fernando. He wrote an article, it's a bit old now, it's 2010, but he wrote it in Christianity Today, and take a look at what he says. It's called "To Serve is to Suffer." That was the title of the article. He says, I get the strong feeling that many in the West think struggling with tiredness from overwork is evidence of disobedience to God. My contention is that it's wrong if one gets sick from overwork through drivenness and insecurity, but we may have to endure tiredness when we, like Paul, are servants of people. Maybe you want to think through, when was the last time you got sick from overwork? You've probably been sick from overwork at some point in your life. I certainly have. Think back to that time. Why was it? Was it because you overworked through drivenness and insecurity and a desire to prove yourself? Or was it because you actually love people and you're trying to care for them? Now, we're sinful, so it's never quite as pure as that. I know sometimes we serve others to serve ourselves. I get that. But it's not wrong to get a little bit sick from serving people. After all, when you do, you end up, it sounds a lot like someone else, doesn't it? The Lord Jesus Christ, the one who literally worked himself to death in order to serve people like you and I. Grace City, good work is often hard work. So don't let an imperfect phrase like work-life balance lead you to think or stop you from pouring yourself out in the service of others and the glory of God. Let me close. One day, every one of us is going to stand before the Lord Jesus Christ, and he's going to ask us, what did you do with the talents that I gave you? What would you love to say to him? I'm not saying what will you say. What would you love to be able to respond? You know, I wasn't much of an evangelist, but I gave it my shot. These four, these 6 people are here because I shared the gospel with them and told them about you. Maybe you say, you know what, I wasn't great with words, but I tell you what, I could earn money. And I earned a truckload of it using the talents that you gave me, and I funded your mission. I sent these people through Bible college. I supported those 5 missionaries. I supported that and that and that parachurch organisation. I gave it to your work. I increased your assets. Maybe say, look, you gave me either small or large leadership gifts. I led my team. I led my department. I led my organisation in such a way, it wasn't perfect, but in such a way that the culture there was one of human flourishing. People were cared for. And as a result, the work we did great good for others. What would you love to be able to say? Again, maybe this week you want to be thinking that through. Let me remind you, though, of what he will say to all those who trust in him and his death on their behalf. Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your master. Won't you join me as we pray? Lord God and Heavenly Father, we thank you for your incredible generosity to us. We know that with great talents bring great responsibility. Lord, we feel both a degree of liberation, knowing that you don't expect things from us that you've given to someone else. We're called to be faithful with what you have given us. And yet also there is a slight burden here that maybe prompts us to think, to act, to work hard, to seek to maximize your assets with the talents that you've given us. Lord, I pray that everything I've said today would be heard with the background of your saving grace and your mercy and the Spirit's work in our lives. May nothing I've said contradict that in any way, but also help us to feel the charge, to feel the call to go and do great things for the Lord Jesus Christ. We pray that in his name. Amen.